Welcome, everyone. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat with your name and where you're from as you're coming in. Welcome, welcome. We'll take about 2 minutes for people to trickle in from the waiting room. The numbers are just pouring in. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat with your name and where you're from. I'm seeing people from all across the country, coast to coast and everywhere in between. A little too fast to keep up with all of them. Welcome, everyone. As you're continuing to come in, feel free to introduce yourself with your name and where you're from in the chat. We'll wait about 1 more minute and then we'll get started. See a few more people trickling in. Feel free to keep on introducing yourselves. All right, I think the flow in from the waiting room is slowing down, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. I'm Courtney Cooperman. I'm the project manager of NLIHC's Our Homes, Our Votes campaign. I use she, her pronouns, and I am just so beyond thrilled to welcome you all to the kickoff of the Our Homes, Our Votes 2024 webinar series. This series is designed to empower housing advocates, tenant leaders, service providers, and anyone else on this call to register, educate, and mobilize voters in your communities and to elevate housing as an election issue. We have a truly jam-packed kickoff webinar full of all-star speakers that will highlight why nonpartisan voter engagement work matters for housing justice and the impact that it can have in your community. We'll first hear some introductory remarks from NLIHC President and CEO Diane Yantel, who will frame why this work matters for NLIHC's mission. Then we'll hear from Gwen Stembridge, Education and Partnerships Coordinator at Nonprofit Vote, about new research demonstrating the effectiveness of nonprofit voter engagement campaigns. Then we'll hear from Dr. Bambi Hayes Brown, President and CEO of Georgia Advancing Communities Together and member of the NLIHC Board of Directors, about what this work looks like on the ground in Georgia. We'll then have a special message from Representative Nakima Williams, lead sponsor of a bill called the Unhoused Vote Act that would strengthen the voting rights of people experiencing homelessness. And last but not least, I'll close out with a preview of our next webinar and some ways to get involved with Our Homes, Our Votes beyond the webinar series. Before I turn it over to Diane, just a few quick housekeeping items. First, the webinar is being recorded. We'll distribute the recording and the links that we share in our Friday email newsletter, The Connection, and the recording will be posted on the NLIHC YouTube channel by the end of this week. Second, we have closed captioning enabled. Big thank you to our captioner for being here today and ensuring that our webinar is accessible. Next, please ask questions using the Q&A feature throughout the webinar. With so many people attending, it can be kind of hard to catch the questions in the chat, so we're more likely to notice them and make sure that they get addressed in the Q&A. And last but not least, I just wanted to give a reminder that Our Homes, Our Votes is 100% nonpartisan, meaning that we don't endorse or favor specific candidates or political parties. Our goal is to build the voting power of low-income renters so we can hold all elected officials accountable to prioritize housing justice. And with that, I will hand it over to NLIHC President and CEO Diane Yantel to frame why this work matters for our mission.
Great, thanks so much, Courtney, and thank you and welcome to the over 800 people that registered to join today's webinar, the Our Homes, Our Votes 2024 kickoff webinar. I am just delighted to see such strong turnout and interest among NLIHC's members and partners on this call. Next slide, May, please. So this year, NLIHC is celebrating our 50th anniversary. For 5 decades, we have worked to achieve racially and socially equitable public policy that ensures that people with the lowest incomes have quality homes that are accessible and affordable in communities of their choice. And the Our Homes, Our Votes campaign really lays the foundation for our ability to achieve this mission. We've always known, certainly everybody on this webinar has always known, and we've known it as a country, that we have the resources and we have the proven solutions to end homelessness and end housing poverty. But what we have always lacked and continue to lack is the political will to fund the solutions at the scale necessary. And of course, a primary way that we build the political will is at the ballot box by empowering, enabling, and equipping directly impacted people and their allies to get out to vote and electing housing champions on both sides of the aisle in both major political parties. And the work of building power fundamentally starts with voter engagement. It starts with registration and turnout. It starts with urging people who are running for office to prioritize housing justice. Next slide, please. And these numbers tell the whole story of why. Right? Homeowners who are disproportionately white, disproportionately higher income, vote at much higher rates than renters who are disproportionately people of color, disproportionately lower income. And in fact, the highest income people are twice as likely to vote as the lowest income people. So, when we ask ourselves, as I do often and have over many, many years, why do policymakers, if they prioritize housing at all, why do they only prioritize home ownership? Why do they provide massive subsidies through the mortgage interest deduction to homeowners while cutting subsidies for renters? This is why. And when we ask ourselves, what will it take to get policymakers to prioritize the housing needs of renters and people who are unhoused? This is what it will take. Closing this gap is the key to building political will. Now, there's obvious reasons why these numbers are skewed, right? The same communities that face the greatest barriers to securing stable, accessible, affordable homes also face the greatest barriers to voting for many reasons, including deliberate voter suppression tactics that disproportionately impact voters of color and renters with low incomes. But the good news is that all of you on this call and beyond through our broad network at the National Income Housing Coalition have the power to break down barriers to the ballot box and build a political will for housing solutions. Next slide, please. Tenant leaders, housing advocates, and service providers are trusted messengers that can get their community members registered and mobilized to vote. And the Our Homes, Our Votes campaign is here to help with that work. So you'll hear more throughout this call and throughout the whole webinar series about all the resources and opportunities that Our Homes, Our Votes makes available so that you can engage voters in your communities without having to reinvent the wheel. And 2024 is obviously a tremendously important election year, and the stakes for housing and homelessness are high. So we'll reach out to potential voters that are most directly impacted by housing policy decisions, but least likely, least able to cast their ballots. and we'll work with them to overcome barriers to the ballot box. Next slide, please. And we'll convey to candidates on both sides of the aisle and really at every level of government that affordable housing is a top priority for voters. So we'll keep encouraging candidates to adopt strong housing platforms that address the needs of the lowest income people. And we did this before to great effect in the 2020 presidential elections. We had, among other things, we had more than 1,000 of our partners signed onto a letter to the presidential debate moderators, urging them to ask a question about affordable housing. And we succeeded. And debate moderators asked a specific question about affordable housing for the first time in the history of televised presidential debates in not just one, but two primary debates. And so by calling attention to housing in the media and on the campaign trail, and by empowering people with lived experience of housing instability and homelessness to engage with candidates, together we really sparked a sea change in the way that candidates talk about housing policy. We ended up with more than a dozen candidates releasing very strong housing platforms that, unlike housing platforms that came before in years before, that really centered the needs of people with the lowest incomes. And together we brought a question that's really on the top of voters' minds to the forefront of the political conversation. And so we'll do so again this year in 2024. We'll continue to elevate housing as an election issue with a focus on housing solutions for people with the lowest incomes. And we're also going to continue to support, track, and elevate state and local housing ballot measures, which really demonstrate that voters want housing solutions and that housing is a winning issue at the ballot box. Next slide, please. And then we'll learn from each other on these calls, on these webinars. What tactics are working in your communities, right? What messages and activities are getting people registered and mobilized to vote? So together through all of this work, we do have the power and the need and the urgency to close the voter turnout gap and change the political calculus. And together we have the power to hold candidates accountable to prioritize housing justice. So again, I'm so glad that you're here, and we're really looking forward to working with you in the coming months. I want to thank you again all for your partnership in our Homes, Our Votes work, and for all of the hard work that you're undertaking in your communities this election cycle. And I also want to thank Courtney Cooperman, who you heard from at the top of the call and who you'll hear from regularly over the next few months, for leading this webinar series and for leading this work for the National Income Housing Coalition. So thank you all again. And Courtney, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Diane, and thank you for your inspiring leadership that has really made everything with Our Homes, Our Votes campaign possible. I'm certainly feeling fired up thinking about all of our accomplishments from 2020 and beyond, and how we're just going to take that to the next level this year. Now, everything that Diane said about the importance of voter engagement and the power of all of us on this call to close voter turnout gaps, we have a lot of data to back that up. And much of that data comes from our partners at Nonprofit Vote, who recently published their latest Nonprofit Power Report, assessing the impact of nonprofit voter engagement in the 2022 elections. To share this research, I'm excited to welcome Gwen Stembridge, Education and Partnerships Coordinator at Nonprofit Vote.
Thank you so much, Courtney. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I am certainly fired up as well, and excited to talk with you about this report today. So thanks so much. Next slide. So a little bit about just who Nonprofit Vote is, in case you are not familiar. Essentially, our role and our mission is to equip you all as nonprofits with the tools that you need to engage your communities in voting and in voter engagement. So we have a lot of different services wrapped around that, but the report is what we're going to focus on today. Next slide, please. So this Nonprofit Power Report, it is quite literally hot off the presses just last month. it was released. And this is a report that essentially the high level piece of this is that when nonprofits are engaging voters, those voters that are engaged by those nonprofits are about 10 percentage points more likely to actually follow through and vote. So all of the work that you all are doing as nonprofit practitioners, as folks on the ground, direct service providers, you all are making a huge difference when you just take that extra little step and engage your communities in voting. So this report gives you that data to back that up. If you're looking for, a tool or something to share with your board or to share with funders or anything like that, I know a lot of nonprofits get questions about engaging in doing voter engagement in some way, and concerns about nonpartisanship and all of that. But this report really is coming from a nonpartisan lens and can be used in those ways to support the work that you are doing. Next slide, please. So the reason that this report is necessary to prove this work is that there are currently gaps in our democracy. So just as Diane was talking about the gaps between low income voters and renters versus homeowners, there are these gaps in our democracy that really make it seem like our whole democracy wants one thing, or our whole country wants one thing, but when all of the voices are not being heard, then we're not going to have our community reflected within our democracy. So nonprofits are the solution here. Next slide, please. So the process, how this happens, is there's kind of a self-perpetuating loop here. So when you think about political campaigns, I'm sure some of you all are already getting lots of messages, text messages, mail, emails, all kinds of communications from campaigns. So whether that's Republican or Democrat or all kinds of other parties, they are reaching out to folks that are on their lists. And they're reaching out to folks who they think are most likely to vote. As many of you know, our voting information about who we vote for is not public information, but whether or not we voted is public information. And so these campaigns are taking that information and saying, okay, this person voted in these past elections, and so they're more likely to vote in this coming election. I'm going to try to use my money in a smart way and only reach out to those that are most likely to actually follow through and vote. So anyone who is not on those campaigns lists is not getting those reminders about what day, what dates are happening, what voting dates are. They're not getting information about the deadlines for any kind of other for mail-in ballots, for anything else. They're not getting those communications. So often, because those campaigns have not made the contact, then those individuals who have not been reached out to don't vote. They don't show up. They don't have the information that they need. They don't feel like their vote matters. There could be a whole host of reasons, but those folks end up not voting. And then the cycle perpetuates, because then those same folks are then labeled as unlikely voters and are not going to get reached out to in the next season. So this is a loop, and we are trying to really change that system and create a new system where those folks who are not currently represented in our democracy can be more represented. Next slide, please. So nonprofits, you all can make that difference, right? You can intervene in that by registering more voters, by getting that information out about elections and the information that people need to know. Nonprofits have that trust with communities. If you are, if you're a food pantry and there are folks that are coming to you every week or every month, you build those relationships, and communities trust those nonprofits to get them the information they need. You're already working to navigate people maybe through the Section 8 process. Maybe, housing vouchers, or maybe it's for SNAP benefits or WIC or things like that. So you've already built that trust, and the same can go with voting as well. Next slide, please. So overall, this is for the data nerds in the room, but if the charts are not as clear for you, I'll just tell you in general that nonprofit engagement boosts turnout, especially among people who are labeled as least likely to vote. There's certain ways that folks are labeled, like I said, based on past voting engagement, and other ways as well. And so even with lower propensity voters, but medium propensity, higher propensity, we are seeing that turnout rate is improving when nonprofits have engaged with those voters. Next slide, please. And this is a piece too that's really important. So that boost in turnout is especially strong when we're talking about voters that are otherwise underrepresented generally in our democracy. So that general number for what nonprofit engagement increases is that 10%. But then when you just factor in people of color, that increases to 12 percentage points. When you're looking at low income voters, that increases to 15 percentage points. And then younger voters, 14 percentage points. So we really see that those gaps are closed, which is a really great thing. And we've got all the data to show you. This is just a little sneak peek of it. Next slide, please. So you can access the Nonprofit Power report. I think the link was put in the chat, but I'll make sure we put it in there as well. There's also a QR code there if that's a good fit for you, and you can find it on our website at nonprofitvote.org. Next slide, please. Just another piece of a report here that I wanted to highlight is a report we did a couple years ago called America's Nonprofits Get Out the Vote. And we found through this survey that about 1 in 5 nonprofits are doing voter engagement in some way. And some of you all might think, oh, that's a great number. That's such a high number, right? 20%. And other folks might look at that and say, only 20% are doing voter engagement work. So either way, we want to increase that number as much as possible. We know that it can be as easy as amplifying information from your local board of elections or elections office. It can be as engaged as a candidate forum or submitting a question. Diane, I'm so glad you raised up that example, making sure that that our elected leaders or our candidates are aware of the issues that impact us. That's really, really important. Next slide, please. Wanted to just give you a little bit about Nonprofit Vote's work generally. We have a lot of free tools. We have a free national webinar series, a whole library of templates, printable things. We'll also work with you to do a tailored webinar. We have a multi-state field program, so we're doing this work on the ground. We have a Philanthropy for Voter Engagement initiative where we know that this work takes funding to do, and we know that funders need to support that in order for you all to be able to do the work on the ground. So we have some toolkits and things for funders, and we do that education. And then we're also the lead managing partner for National Voter Registration Day. Go ahead and mark your calendars for September 17th and sign up to be a National Voter Registration Day partner to get all kinds of tools and stickers and everything that you need for a successful National Voter Registration Day. Next slide, please. And lastly, I'll just say, if you want to be more engaged, if you want to kind of take that next step and get those resources from us, this is the Nonprofit Vote Pledge for 2024. And we just encourage you to sign up. This will also give you access to our emails, to information about the webinars, and other options as well. Next slide, which I think is the last one. So thank you so much, and look forward. I'll pass it back to you, Courtney.
Thank you so much, Gwen. And we had a few questions for you in the chat. If you don't mind taking a few more minutes. We had
Absolutely.
a great question from Claudia asking about accessibility. Could you speak a little bit to what nonprofits are doing or what Nonprofit Vote is doing related to helping voters with disabilities access the ballot?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, we have a couple different resources on our website. There are a few reports related to that. Yeah, and we have a leadership council um, with National Disability Rights Network, I believe, is the organization. Yeah, there are some resources on the website. I think generally, yeah, there are some best practices around that, especially around like rides to the polls. And I would encourage anybody who is on the ground to talk with your local Board of Elections office, especially if you are serving folks, a lot of folks with disabilities, and just talk with them to see what accommodations are available, and really advocate there, but then also they can help you get the word out as well. I hope that answers.
Definitely, thank you. And I know that the American Association for People with Disabilities, AAPD, also has a lot of really comprehensive resources related to voting and accessibility. So definitely recommend checking those out as well. A question from Julie Ann, who we've actually had on one of our webinars before as a speaker. Hi, Julie Ann. Julie Ann is asking if you have worked with libraries or if Nonprofit Vote has partnerships with libraries.
Oh, that's a great question. Yes, we've worked with the National Library Association, and also with every library. Yes, because libraries are really important places to get information. And so we want to ensure that, that they have the information that they need. We're actually working on a toolkit right now that will go out to libraries about how to engage folks, especially in a nonpartisan way, around voting. So yes, love libraries. And I know especially it's yeah, it's important for them. They have a lot of trust with the community often.
To hear. One question from Pamela, which is a little bit more of a technical question. I think I can answer this one, but I will see if Gwen wants to weigh in as well. Pamela is in AmeriCorps Vista, and they have restrictions on political activity. Pamela works as an affordable housing advocate and wonders if they can engage in this activity. My understanding is that Vistas are not allowed to do voter registration in their official capacity. So if you're in your day job, you're not allowed to. If you're representing the program in any way, you're not allowed to. But in your time off, when you're not representing the program, I think that you have the freedom to do that, just as long as it's totally on your own time and not representing the program. Does that sound right to you, Gwen?
Yeah, that sounds right. I'm a Vista alum, so yeah, love that. And yeah, that's my understanding. I would check with your supervisor and all that, but yeah, as long as it's on your own time and you're not wearing gear and things like that. But check with them to be sure.
Thank you. A question from Dan, a comment and a question. I hope NLIHC is working with AARP, national and state chapters. AARP is heavy into voter engagement and is focusing especially on the 40 to 50 age group. Any advice on bringing resources to low engagement seniors? That's a great question. And Dan, I actually personally haven't worked with the AARP yet. So if you want to make a connection, I would be happy to do that. I also know that we're definitely working with specific subsidized properties to get out the vote. And so really want to reach seniors that are living in low income housing. So we definitely want to talk about doing that. Gwen, do you know if any of the nonprofit vote resources are geared towards older adults or any of the nonprofit partners you've worked with?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are none directly off the top of my head, but check our website, or if you want to follow up, I'll put my email in the chat here as well. I'm happy to follow up by email.
Thank you. We had one question about language accessibility. Are there resources as well for sharing information and resources in multiple languages? For the Our Homes, Our Votes resources, currently they're just in English, but we're going to work this year to make many of them available in Spanish. And I'll be updating this group as we move along with that and as those resources become available.
Great. And I can say from our end, our very next webinar is staying nonpartisan, and with some attorneys to really help folks navigate that space of staying nonpartisan, but it's in Spanish. It's next week, the 24th at 2 p.m. Eastern. I'll put a link to that as well, but yeah, some
Thank you.
resources there.
We got so many great questions coming in. These are all incredible, and a lot of them are alluding to other topics of webinars that we'll have coming out throughout the season. A question from Aline: any recommendations on how to make the best changes in states where there are a lot of landlords and the legislatures, which, to be honest, is most states. I think that's something in my view that has worked really well is the formation of renters caucuses. I know in California, there's a renters caucus among the handful of legislators that are renters. There's the Congressional Renters Caucus now, led by Representative Jimmy Gomez. And I think those are really good organized ways for renters or allies of renters that are in positions of elected office to make their voices heard and kind of have collective power in a legislature. So definitely would recommend talking to those legislators that are champions and seeing how they can make their voices heard as a collective. That's something we'll talk about a lot more throughout the series of how to build that power and to leverage the voting power of low-income renters into policy change. Great question. We had a question about engaging Indigenous voters both on and off reservations. Gwen, do you want to weigh in on that one?
A great question. I think we have such a national view that tends to be kind of focused more in local areas. So yeah, I would say if there are nonprofits in the area that are doing that, reference them, and also local elections offices. But yeah, that's something I should learn more about. So thank you for pointing that out.
Thank you. And we have been working with the Native American Rights Fund with Our Homes, Our Votes. So we'll be bringing some more information about engaging Indigenous voters to our network throughout this year. And we've been collaborating on some policy work related to voting rights and tribal housing. So that's definitely on our radar and something that we're really committed to doing. I think those are all the questions that have come through in the Q&A. There may have been some more in the chat, but I think for the sake of time, I'll scroll through those as we move along to our next speaker. But thank you so much, Gwen. Really appreciate you being here. Appreciate all of the insights of the Nonprofit Power Report and all of the resources that Nonprofit Vote puts out for our network. It's been really, really essential for us and for getting Our Homes, Our Votes off the ground and for everything that we bring to our network.
Thank you. We're so grateful for the partnership. Look forward to the rest of the webinar.
Thank you. So again, all of this research just makes it how clear it is that nonprofits' activities on the ground are having a real impact, especially for voters that are historically most likely to be excluded from the political process. I'm now going to turn it over to Dr. Bambi Hayes-Brown, President and CEO of Georgia ACT, for a deeper dive into what these activities look like and all of the incredible work that's been happening in Georgia.
Good day, everyone. Thank you so much, Courtney. It is my pleasure to be here with you today to talk about some of the work that we have done on the ground with Our Homes, Our Votes here in Georgia. Next slide. Again, I'm Dr. Bambi Hayes-Brown with Georgia Advancing Communities Together, also known as Georgia ACT, and we're a statewide nonprofit affordable housing and community development membership organization. I'm also a person with lived experience housing insecurity. I'm formerly homeless and a former public housing resident. So that tends to be the lens that I give when I'm doing speaking engagements around the state of Georgia. Next slide. So some of the past events that we have done, we started doing voter engagement work in 2018, actually doing voter engagement around transit stations. So in Atlanta and Metro Atlanta, we have the MARTA stations, we have bus stations, we have train stations. So we actually started doing that in 2018, registering voters at the MARTA stations. And then as that grew, we didn't expect for it to grow so fast that we continue our work since 2018, most notably doing voter engagements in 2019, 2020, where we did the partner with Fresh Communities doing the 3V Liberation Tour, Votes, Vaccines, and Visions, where we went into 47 rural Georgia cities, reaching over 8,000 individuals, and we had our TV and social media reach over 100,000 people. So we actually went into many of those towns when you're talking about disenfranchised voters. Many people do their work in urban areas, and we do that too. We are based in Atlanta, but we know that there's more to Atlanta, Georgia than just Atlanta. It has 159 counties in Georgia. So we were very intentional about reaching out to rural communities as well as targeting our focus on the Black rural population. And then we continued that work in 2021 with Nonprofit Vote. So shout out to Nonprofit Vote. We're doing nonpartisan voter engagement. We're working with 5 different statewide partners, working with Black Voters Matter, and they're the Block is Hot tour, and doing speaking engagement on the new Georgia Senate Bill 202 that restricted our rights and things that we could do to vote. So we find a way to get around it. And you see some of the pictures here. We partnered with a sorority in Southeast Georgia, Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, and we actually had our billboard. So you see the Our Homes, Our Votes 2020 on a billboard as people we're going up and down I-95. And then we also partnered with other groups such as Delta Sigma Theta sorority. This was during the height of COVID, so we had to pivot and do virtual town hall meetings in Middle Georgia. Next slide. And so I talked about the 3V Liberation Tour, the Votes, Vaccines, and Vision Tour. So that was a strong collaborative effort with Georgia Act, with Fresh Communities, and many, many numerous on-the-ground partners in those 42 cities. And as you can see, during this time of year, it was pretty hot. It was in the middle of the summer, but we had a strong partnership also with the Fort Valley State University. So, you know, looking at your local colleges and universities, especially your HBCUs, and putting together those partnerships to actually go to people. So that's what we did with this particular tour. And this year, we went to different and various communities, and we had a mobile technology trailer that was sponsored to us to use by the Fort Valley State University. So we had people to actually come onto the mobile technology trailer. It was equipped with computers, seats, and Wi-Fi, where people can actually go on and register themselves. And we also had town hall meetings actually on the bus. And we partnered with mobile health clinics that provided shots for those who wanted to get the vaccines, as well as lots and lots of food. Next slide. And this is another leg of the 3V Liberation Tour in Fitzgerald, Georgia, where I am currently dialing in. We went to the Monitor Center, and again, we had our town hall meeting. We had the mayor, the gentleman who was the mayor at the time. We had city council persons, and all giving people information about the Our Homes, Our Votes campaign, and really centering housing, because housing insecurity and housing unaffordability is throughout the state of Georgia. So it's not just an urban issue. It's not just a rural issue. It's an everyone issue. Next slide. And you see here, we partnered with Black Voters Matter to do the Block is Hot tour in Savannah. And trust me, the block was hot. It was very hot that day. But as you can see, there were so many people that were lined up. We had swag, we had giveaways, we had things for the children, for youth. And so taking advantage of our partnerships and working together to put forth those events on the ground, going to where people are, was very, very beneficial to us. Next slide. And we also took that opportunity to meet with some of our federal elected officials. So you see us here with Senator John Ossoff and the Georgia delegation that we had during the National Income Housing Coalition's Policy Forum. So if you are not a member of the National Income Housing Coalition, please join, please get engaged, because we do this work when we talk about voting and advocacy and making sure that housing is at the forefront of everything that we do. We do it on the state, local, and the federal level. Next slide. So I want to talk and center a little bit more about some of our voter engagement tactics. We were very intentional in doing the urban, suburban, and rural. And as we continue our work this year, we're also working with youth and young people. So going into the high schools, one of our partners, the NAACP in DeKalb County, Georgia, has been going into high schools. We have another group that is going into high schools in Clayton County. And so we want to make sure that those youth who are 17 and a half are registered to vote. And then we also invited numerous students from around the state to visit our housing day at the Capitol. And I did a special presentation for them about advocacy and the importance of voting. So when we're doing this, we cannot forget our young people. And yes, Monica, you are exactly right. The people who are being evicted most are Black families, and that's around the state, mostly Black women. But also what we have been doing is talking to elementary school students. So actually going into the schools during career days or any other special occasions that we can actually go into the schools and we can talk about advocacy and how it's fun and how it's exciting. And the importance of voting, even though those young people are not of age to vote, guess what? They're going to take it home. They're going to take it to their parents, their grandparents, their guardian, whoever they have at home. And young people can be very influential. So we start even all the way to elementary schools, educating people about the importance of voting and how housing intersects with everything that we do. Another thing that we have to talk about is non-traditional engagement. So working with the local sheriffs and the detention facilities, because I know that, and hopefully most of us should know that everybody that is in a detention facility is not guilty. Everybody that has been locked up may have not been convicted of a felony or any other things that may prohibit or inhibit voters. So people who are in those detention centers that are waiting for their hearings, we have been working with local communities to get them to vote and get them registered to vote. And that's something that you can do with working in partnership with your local sheriff's offices, again, transit stations, and piggybacking. Because Georgia Act, we have a small staff. We depend heavily on our partnerships, and we could be much more impactful when we're doing our partnerships and we're working together. And our role in any type of voter engagement is to make sure that housing is at the forefront. And the National Low Income Housing Coalition has a housing providers council, and many of those developers have units that are in the areas that we are serving. So Georgia, we are partnering with Mercy Housing and Dominion, who are members of the Housing Providers Council and has residents in those houses that we're going to actually go in and do some canvassing. And then also those creative partnerships are so important. We've done extensive work with nonprofit Vote. We're also looking to work this year with Vote Riders, and that is a group that will give people rides to and from the polls. We do know that there are some ride share companies that have vouchers for people to go to the polls, but then they have to get a voucher or something to come back. But Vote Riders is offering people those rides to and from the polls, including those who are differently abled. There are many faith-based institutions that have church vans and church buses that can also take people to and from the polls. our many NAACP branches that we have here and around Georgia and around the nation have housing committees. So working with those housing committees, along with their political action committees, working together with groups like ours that can actually go out and do voter engagement, working with those social and civic organizations, those fraternities. And this last one here, funeral homes. Yes, funeral homes. So we're not trying to make this your last destination or the final destination. But when you're working in the rural communities that don't have as many resources, most of them will have a funeral home somewhere in the area. And what does funeral homes, what do they have? They have limousines. So in my hometown of Cordele, Georgia, we did have some groups that work with a very well-known funeral home in the area, and the funeral home allowed some of our partners to borrow the vehicles to take people to and from the polls. Next slide. And so as we continue our voter engagement while I'm here in South Georgia, we are partnering with various groups, the city, the local municipalities, the city of Cordele, one of our partners and members, Southwest Georgia United, also the Southwest Georgia Housing Task Force that is a partner with the Southwest Georgia Regional Commission, the City of Albany, the Georgia Department of Community Affairs, and HUD, doing and speaking at those various housing conferences and housing summits about the importance of voting and keeping housing at the forefront. So these are just a couple of things that we could do. Yes, I'm getting a lot of shout outs about the funeral homes. Next slide. And this is something that the National Low Income Housing Coalition designed for us when we had our 2024 Housing Day at the Capitol. And we had a lot of young people there who were of voting age. And we had this QR code. And for those of you who maybe a little less tech savvy like me, can use the link in order to register, for people to register or get any updates about voting. Next slide. And here's our contact information, but I will say this, when we're talking about conservative states, Georgia is a conservative state on the state level. We just finished up our Georgia legislative session, but guess what? We were able to provide and able to get past two important bills. One we did in 2019, that was House Bill 346, that protect tenants against landlords who may retaliate against them if they complain to code enforcement or the health department for unsafe or unhealthy living conditions. That is a state law that was passed and went into effect July the 1st, 2019. And then we also got House Bill 404 passed. That's the Safe at Home Act that will bring Georgia in line with many, many other states. I believe it's like 40 something states that gives us a warranty of habitability. So landlords will be required to make sure that the home is habitable to live in. It meets safety and code standards, has heating and cooling, and there's other caveats to that bill that strengthens the very limited renter protections that we do have here in Georgia. But it passed unanimously on the House. On the Senate side, we only had 2 dissenting votes on the Senate side, and it is at the governor's desk for him to sign into law. So Georgia, again, if we could do it, you could do it too, but it started from the ground up and doing this grassroots effort because housing affects everybody, regardless if you're Democrat or Republican or independent. People heard from their constituents, and the legislators thankfully voted in favor of these 2 bills. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bamby. I always love hearing about all of the creative partnerships that you have, ranging from schools to funeral homes. I'm seeing a lot of praise and enthusiasm in the chat. I think for the sake of time, we're going to move on to our special message from Representative Nikema Williams, continuing in the theme of Georgia. And I'll just preface this by saying that we know that our work has an incredible impact, and we are organizing to overcome barriers to the ballot box. But we also know that policies are often stacked against our communities, and we need policy change like the ones that Representative Williams has introduced in a bill called the Unhoused Vote Act, and we'll talk about in this video. We need policy change in addition to organizing to level the playing field and enable the lowest income people to turn out to vote. So with that, we will present this special message.
Good afternoon, y'all. I'm Congresswoman Akima Williams, proudly representing Georgia's fighting 5th Congressional District and the city of Atlanta. For those of you who don't know, I hold the seat once held by my friend, my mentor, and predecessor, the late Congressman John Lewis. And as all of y'all know, Congressman Lewis would tell us to get into good trouble, necessary trouble. I have no doubt that everyone here for the Our Homes, Our Votes 2024 webinar knows exactly how to get into that good trouble that Congressman Lewis taught us. And I am so proud to count you all as co-conspirators for justice as we do this work together, especially when it comes to fighting for safe places to live for those most marginalized. Because that's what we're all here for, right? Y'all are all here to fight for inclusivity, access, and most importantly, empowerment for those who need safe and desirable housing. And that's the work that I'm doing right here in Congress every day. I want to start by talking about the intersections of housing policy and policies that impact unhoused people and voting rights. Actually, you know who cared deeply about that intersection? Congressman John Lewis himself. He introduced the Voting Rights of Homeless Citizens Act 3 different times during his tenure in Congress. So y'all, when I got to Congress, I used that bill as a starting point, and I talked to amazing organizations like the National Low Income Housing Coalition, National Alliance to End Homelessness, and the National Coalition for the Homeless, as well as the National Housing Law Project, to put together a comprehensive bill to address this very need. My Unhoused Voter Opportunity Through Elections, or Unhoused Vote Act, prevents discrimination against unhoused people at the ballot box. It sets standards and protections to ensure access to the ballot for unhoused people and provides policies and resources to affirmatively improve access to voting for unhoused people. For example, the bill makes it so that shelter addresses can be used to register to vote, as can drawings of intersections where a person typically resides. It makes it so ballot drop boxes are accessible to unhoused people and allows that attesting to a person's residence satisfies voter ID registration requirements. Y'all, it is so important that we protect and expand voting rights. We're all here because we know that that negative impacts of housing policy, of our social safety net, of our education policy, it all falls disproportionately on those most marginalized. And because of that, we must ensure that people most impacted by these policies have a voice and have their voice heard in the communities right where they live. But that applies to y'all too. I need all of you to be co-conspirators for justice and voting rights, the same way that y'all are co-conspirators for housing equity. Believe me, I know the feeling of being upset at public officials for their cruel ideas that target those most marginalized, but that's exactly why we need to get behind a more inclusive, accessible election system that empowers people to make a statement against using minorities and low-income people as pawns for political points. Y'all know that a person's right to a safe and affordable place to live shouldn't depend on their race, gender, ethnicity, religion, sexuality, HIV status, bank account, or zip code, and neither should their right to vote. These two go hand in hand. Standing up for the most marginalized means empowering marginalized people to stand up and speak up for themselves. And that is why I introduced the Unhoused Vote Act, to ensure that everyone can be heard, no matter their housing situation, no matter their bank account, and no matter their zip code. So I'm proud to count you all as co-conspirators for justice as we do this work together.
Wonderful. I am just so thrilled that we have such strong champions in Congress that really recognize the intersection of housing justice and voting rights and are working with us in this movement and inspiring us to get into some good trouble. On that note, I'm going to spend our last few minutes going over some ways that we're going to get into good trouble together this election cycle with all of the upcoming events or not all of, but it's the preview of the upcoming events and opportunities in the Our Homes, Our Votes 2024 agenda. So in addition to joining these webinars, I also encourage everyone to join the Our Homes, Our Votes Affiliates Network. Affiliates are nonpartisan organizations that are committed to carrying out the goals of the Our Homes, Our Votes campaign. Advocacy organizations, direct service providers, resident councils and tenant associations, local governments, really any organizations that are on this call are welcome to become Our Homes, Our Votes affiliates. Affiliates will be included on a listserv where we regularly share announcements and opportunities related to nonpartisan voter engagement. We'll also have regular affiliates office hours beginning in May, where affiliates can workshop their voter and candidate engagement plans. We'll have a virtual post-election affiliates gathering to celebrate the work that we did this year, and affiliates will have some enhanced access to Our Homes, Our Votes tools and resources. And we'll have that link in the chat where you can learn more and sign up to become an affiliate. We also convene the Housing Providers Council, which is a nonpartisan group of subsidized housing developers, property managers, and resident services staff that are committed to boosting voter turnout in their properties. The Housing Providers Council meets virtually every other month to receive trainings and exchange best practices in nonpartisan voter engagement. And please note, this group is mostly intended for housing providers, for developers, property managers, and resident services staff, but other organizations that don't fall within that category should join the broader affiliates network. So we'll drop the link to learn some more and sign up for the Housing Providers Council. We also have the Our Homes, Our Votes website with comprehensive resources and tools and templates that you can use to launch your own nonpartisan voter and candidate engagement work. I highly recommend checking out the Our Homes, Our Votes Voter and Candidate Engagement Toolkit and Media Toolkit. We'll drop the link where you can find those in the resource library in the chat. Next slide. We also are rolling out a brand new one-stop shop where you can register to vote, check your voter registration status, find nonpartisan election information for your community, and sign up for election reminders. This is the Our Homes, Our Votes TurboVote platform. You can find it at the link. We'll drop a link in the chat, or you can scan the QR code. This is a really great place to look if you've moved recently, if you haven't registered to vote yet, if you want to check and see if you're registered to vote, or if you know that you're registered but want to make sure that you get reminders about elections. You'll get texts or email reminders so that you make sure that you know when and where to vote. It's a really, really great resource. And in future webinars, we'll also cover how you can use it as a tool in your organization's nonpartisan voter engagement campaigns. Next slide. And of course, finally, you heard from Gwen a little bit earlier about National Voter Registration Day. It's on Tuesday, September 17th, so save the date. Our Homes, Our Votes is proud to be a partner of National Voter Registration Day, and we encourage everyone on this call to become a community partner. Community partners are committed to engaging in nonpartisan voter registration activities on this civic holiday and will receive access to exclusive training webinars and free swag from National Voter Registration Day. So there's really no reason not to do it. And you can click the link in the chat to sign up to become a National Voter Registration Day partner. Next slide. Before we close out, I just want to remind everyone that this webinar series will take place twice a month until mid-November. We hope that you'll continue to join us and spread the word to your networks. Our next webinar will be 2 weeks from today on Monday, April 29th at 2:30 Eastern, and is titled Laying the Groundwork for Your Campaign. You'll hear a bit more from me about the essentials of keeping your election work nonpartisan. You'll hear from Morgan Murray, Voter Engagement Programs Manager for the League of Women Voters, and you'll hear from Eddie Zerbe, the Deputy Director of Students Learn, Students Vote, who will talk more about celebrating the civic holidays. Next slide. You can find a full description of upcoming webinars and actually preview the agendas for the entire series on the Our Homes, Our Votes website. There's a quick snapshot of that here on this slide. Next slide. That brings me to the end. We have 1 minute left, so I'll check and see if there are any burning questions. But if not, I just truly can't thank you all enough for being here today, for being part of this kickoff, and for being in this movement. We're looking forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks and to engaging with many of you through the Affiliates Network, the Housing Providers Council, and all other Our Homes, Our Votes and NLIHC channels. My email is on the slide and I'll drop it in the chat. Please feel free to reach out to me with any questions or ideas for collaboration. That is what we're here to do. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. That was so great. I learned things.
Me too.
Thank you. I'm sorry I went a little long.
No, you were perfect. We wrapped up in perfect time. That was amazing. Well, I will see you all soon. I'm sure we'll chat over email. And thank you for taking the time to be here and to make this a special kickoff.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.